None of the things that happen during our Saturn return are set in stone. And if anything, they're choice points. It's just like a series of forks in the road asking you, who do you want to be in this world? How do you want to show up? How do you want to be remembered? I want to be remembered for my integrity. I want to be remembered for doing what's right, even when there's a pile of money staring me in the face. And I think the world needs that. Hello, dear friends, it's Carly, and welcome back to my channel and to my Saturn Return story time. My Saturn Return was probably the most magical span of time in my entire life, and to the point where, especially as I prepared for this video and I'm reflecting back on what all happened during my Saturn Return, it really challenges my working assumptions about Saturn as a malefic planet in astrology, meaning Saturn brings hard things or bad things, even depending on who you're listening to. And my experience of my Saturn return was blessing after blessing after blessing. And I'm going to tell you the full story. You can see this video got a little bit long. I haven't even recorded it yet. I'm just assuming, because I am just really going to settle in and tell this story, because I am mostly thinking of a few friends that I have that are in their 20s who haven't gone through their first Saturn return yet. And I want this story of magical blessings unfolding to be out there amongst the voices of what does a Saturn return entail. I do think, based on what I've listened to, the stories of other people, mine seems to be one of like the best, I don't know, that I've ever heard. I would love to hear your Saturn return stories down below. If you have lived through one or two or three even, like, let me know how they go. Because before we get into my story, I do want to, in typical Carly fashion, I want to lay down a little bit of a framework of what even are Saturn returns, because I think whether you think about it in terms of it's bringing bad things or good things, there's a pretty objective framework at play, and that is that Saturn returns happen every 29.5 years. That's how long it takes for Saturn to loop all the way around the sun, make one full orbit, and go all the way through the zodiac wheel then, and return to where it was when you were born. So for example, this is where my Saturn is, and you can see that the transit Saturn is the green one on the outside, is exactly where my Saturn is, and it took 29.5 years for that to happen, and the exact date of it I've also put on the screen here for you. So that's just an example of what you're looking for. So that means that between ages 29 and 30, like literally that whole year typically, and then also you would have another one at age 59, and then you have another one at age 88.5. So those would be the three that, if you have a nice long life, that those would be your three initiations. That's what that Saturn return is doing. It's bringing the end of the one phase that you were currently living, and it is initiating you, or it's having those growing pains of moving you out of that life phase into the next life phase. So as an example, one of the references that I really enjoyed learning about Saturn returns was in Stephen Forrest's Book of Earth, and he goes through all of the different Earth archetypes, and Saturn is included as the ruler of Capricorn. And he devotes an entire chapter to Saturn returns specifically because they are so significant as turning points in the evolution of our development throughout our life. He's an evolutionary astrologer, and he claims that he's not looking at it in terms of like evolution, like we came from primates. He's looking at it like, you know, day to day in our life, we evolve. So like, let's say you have a really intense, difficult conversation with your partner, but through that conversation, you open this new territory of open, clear communication within the relationship. That's growth. That's evolution of who you are and how you're showing up in the world. So opportunities for evolution happen every day. And the phases of our life, as he describes them, like the first 29 and a half years, he claims is childhood. Most of us think we have to grow up when we turn 18, or that we automatically do. And in astrology terms, we really don't. Not until we're almost to our 30th birthday have we really explored and dreamed and tried to conceive of basically what is the dream version of why you came into this world. When we're kids, like little kids, you know, we have a really easy time dreaming. And he gives a perfect example of like someone who wants to be a movie star when they're really, really young. And then as they grow up a little bit, they decide they want to be an actor. That's more how they're thinking about it, how they're relating to it. And their acting career, they got a couple good gigs, but mostly they met like a lighting director on set at one of their jobs. And they really hit it off with this person, felt very resonant with them. And it became a mentor relationship where this lighting director professional taught them the trade of lighting on sets. And so now, by the time they get to their second Saturn return, they are a lighting professional. And that path that they met their soulmate or their significant other, their life partner, on set, they were the lighting director, or the person in the story showed up as the lighting director, and the other person was some other like set design person on that same set. And so had they not taken that path of kind of abandoning the original dream of being a movie star or an actor, it evolved into something completely different, but put them on the right path at the right time. And so that's kind of how that childhood phase works. It's like those dreams, they don't have to be tethered to reality to work. They have to point you in the right direction. And then the initiation of your first Saturn return is really where we initiate into that second phase of life. So basically age 30 through 59. And that's where we have a reality check of sorts. Like in midlife, our brain literally changes to where we are not as dream oriented as we were before, especially towards like fantasy type dreaming, where we see no realistic path towards that dream. I would call that a fantasy. If you have a dream and you have a specific path to get there, or you have an idea of how to get there, that's a goal. So in midlife, we become more goal-oriented, less fantasy-oriented, I guess is how I could say that. And then last, well, I guess not last, because it depends on how long you live, but when you go through your second Saturn return, so at age 59, that initiation is taking you out of kind of like the heaviest phase of life, being that midlife reality version. And it's basically shedding a lot of the common concerns of midlife about making the money and raising the kids and being responsible and like all of the things that you're trying to accomplish in your life. By the time you're 60, 59, mostly you've done a lot of that. And so that elderhood phase is that next phase where you mostly aren't focused on gathering resources and experiences. You're mostly focused on giving. So you want to give away what you've gathered. You want to teach what you've learned. If you've made a lot of money, you want to share it. You want to, get into philanthropy. You want to give it to your family for them to do what they need to do with it. All of these ways where you're giving away what you've worked in that midlife section to build. And then from there, if you make it to age 88 and you go through that next initiation into the last, for most people, the last phase is really, again, your brain changes again. And your grip on reality, if you look at it, it's like really loose in childhood. It's the strongest in midlife. And then from there, we begin to shed layers of our grip on reality. And by the time you get to that last phase, like age 88, 89 and beyond, the brain changes again. And basically it's preparing for transition back into non-physical or source energy, transitioning your soul back into a place where it doesn't really have a body. So really your energy is becoming more and more and more disconnected from this world, preparing for its final transition back into source energy. So those are the phases and the initiations, and the things that happen around your Saturn return create those ends of your childhood and beginning of this. And I think as I tell my story, all of that is going to kind of come to life a little bit more. That's why I love practical examples or stories rather than just talking about theories. But I wanted to leave you with this, and this is what Stephen Forrest, how he boils it down as far as like your Saturn return initiations. So that would be at every 29 and a half years, not just the first one. But these initiations will move through your life and they will leave you one of two things: exhausted or depressed. And those are your only options. And maybe in that sense, maybe that's where Saturn gets like its malefic. Neither of those sound like great options, right? Like exhausted, depressed, like, okay. But when you think about if those were your only two options, which one would you pick? Well, I would pick exhausted, because I've gone to bed at the end of the day exhausted because I spent my energy doing something that like truly mattered in the world. It was fulfilling on a soul level, and because it was fulfilling, I dug even deeper to put even more of my energy into it. And that's why when I lay down at the end of that day, I am purely exhausted. I have spent every ounce of my life force energy that I had access to for this time. I must rest because I gave it all. And that's what your Saturn return is asking for. And the alternate is that it's asking for everything you have. And if you don't give it, if you skip the initiation, if you find the mountain that your soul wants to climb and you look at it and go, that's pretty tall. I think I'll just have a nap instead. That's what leads to the depressed outcome. It's like you skipped climbing the mountain. You skipped showing up with all of the tools that you've gathered along your path and applying them all to the task in front of you. That's what the Saturn initiation is about, is like the first 29 and a half years, you're just exploring, you're just playing. There's no agenda, there's no rhyme or reason to all of the different things that you get up to in those first 29 and a half years. And then I know from my experience, and I think, I wonder if this is really what Saturn is getting at. It's like, it's amazing how your Saturn return initiation magically ties together like all of these random components that you could have never woven them together yourself into a coherent tapestry, and somehow the universe or whatever, maybe it was your plan all along, but it turns out it was brilliant. You've prepared for the test. You have everything that you need. And the piece that I found challenging, the part where I can see how people might get pulled into a giving up kind of place, is that there was a lot where I've never done this before. I've never experienced what I'm having to do to climb this mountain. It's like climbing a mountain with no mountain climbing experience. That's what mine felt like. And it required a level of self-trust that at the beginning of it, I did not possess, period. And I think that that was the main part of that first initiation. It's when you go from childhood to adulthood. And what is the difference? It doesn't happen magically at 18, even though, like laws and whatnot, whatever. What changes between childhood and adulthood? I think it's the ability to trust ourselves. I think it's the ability to be self-reliant. It's the ability to face the unknown and dig within yourself rather than immediately looking for somebody to come in and help you. In childhood, we are very dependent on other beings. I mean, right from the start, that's how we're biologically, that's how it works. We intend it this way. There are mammals who come out and imagine like a colt that's born, like it's running around independent, fully functional within the same day that it's born. That's not us. We're coming in wanting to create this connection with these other beings. And through our Saturn return, I think we shed a level of dependence. And it's like, if you don't trust yourself, if you feel like I need someone else to tell me what's right, I need someone else to help me when I come into contact with these unknown things, like that's where you can maybe get into a place of giving up. But if you're willing and able to believe in yourself, believe that you will land on your feet, believe like what I'm saying about the the test that's coming, your Saturn return, that mountain that you're going to climb as part of it, you have every single tool and every single knowledge and skill that is required, because even though you're climbing a mountain with no mountain climbing experience, you've done all of the little tasks that are part of mountain climbing. Like as the example, the analogy, we're going with it, we're just gonna power through. It's like you've done all the bits and pieces, and just because you've never seen yourself put all the bits and pieces together and do it all at once to like apply those skills to climbing this mountain, just because you've never witnessed it doesn't mean it's not possible. Your Saturn return is you proving to yourself that it is possible, that you are capable. And to be proving it to yourself that you're capable, you have to do something that is out of your depth. You have to stretch beyond what you've ever done before. And if you do that, it will leave you feeling exhausted at the end of it. I'm on like year 2 of resting from my Saturn return. Good times. So exhausted. There were moments where I wondered if I would ever bounce back. I was so empty of physical energy, and in the absence of physical energy, just like lethargy and depression, and like it made me extremely vulnerable energetically to be that low in terms of my physical energy, low on sleep, low on good nutrition, working all the time, on and on and on. So that put my whole system in a place where, like I said, I'm on year 2 of recovering. And last but not least, a key word for Saturn is consequences. And if you grew up like I did, consequences was basically a dirty word. Like it has some gigantic negative connotation around it. But when you really look at what does consequences mean, all it means is cause and effect. Cause and effect. That's neutral. That's like 2 + 2 = 4. Consequences. When you take 2 and you put 2 with it, you get 4. Consequences. Like it's neutral. It's not good or bad. Rewards are consequences. When you do good work and you add value to the world, you get consequences of good things coming back to you and people recognizing you for your talents and the value that you're putting into the world. So when you're climbing the mountain, when you're digging deep inside of yourself to trust yourself and be able to pull on every single tool you've ever picked up along your path, it's like when you apply them well, the consequences are rewards. But when you're doubting yourself and you're not believing that you can, so you don't even try, that's when the consequences start to look like punishments. So I think it's kind of like of a telltale sign, like how the person is looking at their own Saturn return, like how their story sounds. Like if it sounds like negative, punishing consequences, then there's almost like a you just want to ask them, like, do you think you could have dug any deeper? Like, was there more in there that you were holding yourself back on giving? Because the consequences are just neutral. It's just a reflection of what you're putting out is what is coming back to you. That Saturn return is a reality check that says, here, let me just go ahead and update you and give you a big dose of consequences on the energy that you're putting out into the world, the effort that you're putting out, the way you're investing your time. Saturn is all about time. It's very responsible when it comes to time. It understands that time is limited. It's not infinite. So when you come here, you have a finite amount of time. And if you're not moving in the right direction, if you're, over here doing something because this is what you think you should be doing versus climbing the mountain that your soul really wants to climb, again, the consequences can look like punishments, but that is just showing you you're on the wrong track. You're approaching life according to somebody else's recipe, and those consequences don't feel good. But when you're on your soul's path, when you're like showing up in the world the way you planned, it's an endless magical unfolding. With that, I want to lay down the next layer of foundation of looking at some of the specifics of my chart. So I fully understand, and I want to lay this in here so that you can look in your unique situation, that like Saturn is not the only planet making transits on my natal chart. So like while I'm having my Saturn return, there are also other things happening. And for me, there were a couple specific things happening, mostly to do with Pluto, which rules transformation. Like caterpillar to butterfly style transformation. That's what we're talking about with Pluto. The old no longer exists and the new comes out of the cocoon after the old has melted down into gel. Reforms as something new and it moves forward for another life phase. And that is what Pluto does. So if you look at my chart while the Saturn return was exacting, you'll see that I also had Pluto transiting my midheaven. Midheaven is our soul's work, it's our vocation, it's how we show up in the world and like what we want to be remembered for. And Pluto ruling transformation was like literally sitting on top of my midheaven at the time of my Saturn return. So that is one thing. Saturn also is the ruler of my midheaven in my 10th house, since that falls in Capricorn. While Pluto was transforming my midheaven, Saturn was also doing its thing where it brought me a big dose of consequences, and that you'll see at the beginning it was a lot rougher than once I got into it and I got headed in the right direction. It was magical. Also at that same time, my natal Pluto, which is in Scorpio, had Jupiter, the moon, and Mars all sitting right on top of my natal Pluto while my Saturn return was exacting. So there was a lot going on in the cosmos at that time. I found the same thing for my Chiron opposition that I looked into briefly. But anyways, it's like there's always more than just one thing going on, which is also going to add flavor to your unique Saturn return. Like mine had so much to do with my Pluto in the 7th house, which is all about our like partnerships. And so taking on a new business partner during that time and then having growth around that relationship all throughout that experience. So that made a lot of sense. The fact that my midheaven was included and that the whole thing turned into a giant renovation of my career space, that made a lot of sense. My Saturn's in the 9th house. I had a spiritual awakening. That makes a lot of sense. So there's a lot of different pieces that I feel like may or may not be unique to my unique Saturn placement in my chart and the other transits that happen to be going on at that time. I just want to make sure I'm giving a little bit of space to that so that it doesn't sound like Saturn return automatically equals your career getting an overhaul and you having a spiritual awakening. Those things are not guaranteed. That just fits really specifically with the 9th house and my midheaven both being included in this transit for me. And the last piece I want to bring in is what degree is your natal Saturn at? So like my natal Saturn is at 29 degrees, almost on into the next sign. It's just barely at the end of Sagittarius, right there with my Uranus. And so for me, I started to feel, like we'll see when we get to the timeline, I started to feel the ingress of Saturn immediately into Sagittarius. You'll see it's so like, how do you even make this shit up? You can't. So as soon as it stepped in, which was a solid 2.5 years before my Saturn return perfected, I was having the ripple effects of this. I was having the shock of like the wake up call, the reality check. Like, are you following your recipe or somebody else's? Because I think you're following somebody else's and it doesn't look like it's working for you, but you don't seem to be admitting that. So here, let me help you admit that. And that was basically the first chapter of my Saturn return. And then I guess one more thing I want to bring in here. How many last things can there be? Like another thing. The other thing I want to bring in here is this table that often appears when you pull your natal chart. And I mostly want to show you this so that you can see how dominantly leaning my mutable energy is. It's like all of what I am. Not really. I have some other, you see, I have like then a decent chunk of fixed energy. So that really does ground me back into myself. And when you look across, like the only element where I have all three of their signs included is Earth. So again, that is another grounding force for me as a person. But my dominant mode is mutability. Which basically another word for that is adaptability, changeability, plasticity. I'm very open to what is life showing me and how does that update who I want to be and how I want to live and all of that. I also have an open identity center, so I try on identities like tops and I put it on and I'm like, nope, that's itchy, take it back off. You know, just because why not? And so I wanted to put that in there as another like level of our foundation to say that my dominant approach in life and in my Saturn return is to jump off the cliff and ask questions later. It's like I can figure stuff out as I go. I'm like the cat who always lands on its feet. Like one of my theories going into my Saturn return, just as an example, is that I can learn anything. That was like, as far as I was early in my process of kind of waking up inside of myself. And one of the things I realized was that I'm really good at learning stuff, where other people seem to really kind of have to work to integrate new information into their system. I soak it up like a sponge, so fast, so effortless. Like, I think one of my superpowers might be learning. I think I can learn pretty much anything. And then I manifest my Saturn return experience, which has me open a grocery store with no grocery store experience. So the whole entire thing was a crash course in learning how grocery stores work fast enough to be able to build one and then run it once it was open. So yeah, that was obviously putting this theory that I had about myself, which was that I think one of my superpowers is learning. I think I'm really good at it. Like, that's how I was back then. And then I manifest this experience, this initiation, where I prove to myself that that is not only true, but it's rock solid, that you can take that check to the bank. Like, I can learn anything I put my mind to. I just point my focus there and it absorbs into my system. That's how my energy works. It's one of my superpowers. I can't throw a ball at a target to save my life. I fall down walking straight on smooth ground. Like, no athletic ability to be found anywhere in these parts, but I can learn like a sponge. And my Saturn return proved that to me. It proved my own superpower to me. Again, that's where does self-trust come from? Where does self-reliance come from? It comes from seeing yourself in action and being pleased by the performance, you know? Like, and all that takes so often is showing up and having the humility to say that I may not know everything I need to know yet, but I can learn as I go. And so I've seen very, very, very few charts where there's no mutable energy. Almost all of us have at least some mutable energy in our chart. And that really is that ability to be open to change and adaptation and being able to learn as you go, to kind of fill in the gaps around, like I said, you've done bits and pieces of everything that you're going to have to do, but you've never strung it all together in that way to apply these skills to this task. And there will be some learning included. That's part of that initiation of going from childhood to adulthood. Okay, so we finally made it to the part. I'm so excited to share with you the timeline of my Saturn return. And I've put it together. I'm going to show you kind of slide by slide and then talk through it with pictures. I went through the other day. I actually recorded this whole video once a week or two ago and decided it wasn't fun enough. So I deleted that. And I'm really glad I did, because one of the updates was that I'm going to show you pictures while I'm telling my stories, and pictures worth 1,000 words, am I right? Okay, so the first thing I want to start off with is this slide of my first Saturn return took place when Saturn was in Sagittarius from September 18th of 2015 through December 20th of 2017. And like I said, my Saturn is at the very end of Sagittarius. So my exact Saturn return wasn't until December of 2017, like just a few days before Saturn moved on into Capricorn. But I had periods of evolution throughout this entire time. It wasn't just when it was exact. There was a much larger timeline at play. So it also made a brief ingress, Saturn did, into Sagittarius from Scorpio. It covered just a few degrees of Sagittarius, and then it went retrograde and went back into Scorpio for a time and then came back, and that's the main dates that we have. But I also have some really startling pieces of my timeline that fit so perfectly with that very first ingress. It was like, as soon as Saturn took one step into Sagittarius, it was like, hello, I'm here now. I'm here to deliver your consequences. I'm here. I brought them with me. They're wonderful. They're exactly what you needed. They match exactly what you're doing with your life. They're going to be great. You're going to love them. Spoiler, I didn't love the first version of the consequences. It was definitely an update that needed to take place. So here, we're going to start with 2014 and 2015. So December 19th of 2014, I got engaged. to a guy that I had been with for about 2 years. We've been living together for about a year, and we got engaged like literally days before Saturn took its first steps into Sagittarius. And so by the time Saturn got into Sagittarius, I was engaged and full steam ahead on wedding planning. And this was interesting because it basically led to my spiritual awakening, but we'll get there. Right before it was done, being in Sagittarius for that very first chunk, June 6th of 2015, I had my bachelorette weekend, and that story is probably too long to tell, but it was basically the beginning of the end of my engagement. And that weekend, my fiance went to Florida with his friends, and my friends all came to our house that we had bought, and we played in the pool and we cooked so much good food, and it was a good time. And during that, we stuffed the invitations for my wedding. And those invitations sat on my coffee table for 2 months before, like every day when I would walk by them, I'm like, I don't feel like mailing those wedding invitations today. And then the next day would come and like, I should mail those. I don't feel like it. And it wasn't ever anything like, I don't want to because I don't know if I want to marry him. It was like, I just don't feel like doing that today. I was like lazy about it, like just didn't want to do it. So getting into August, Saturn's back in Scorpio and it stations direct. So Saturn retrograde comes to an end. And anytime you have a planet station, meaning it like comes to a stop on a degree point, that's a powerful energy. It's like a changing directions. There's a shift that happens in that stationing day, and it's so perfect the next day. So it stations direct August 2nd, and then on August 3rd was when I was leaving work one day, like I always do, and I walk down to the parking garage and I go to get in my car. I'm in the seat and I'm like pulling the door shut as I just like erupt in tears, just crying uncontrollably. And I shut the door and I'm like, what is this? Like at that point, I was not a crier at all. And I'm like, what's happening here? And I was very confused. I remember being confused for a good chunk of time. It was maybe 2 seconds, I don't know. But I'm crying so hard, I don't know why. And it was in that moment, it was literally like there was just sudden stillness. And I heard this voice say, you have to cancel the wedding. And I realized as I heard the voice say it, and the voice said you, and I find that very interesting. I look back now and I think it was my higher self talking to me, but you know, who knows? And I realized I was crying because I was terrified and I knew I was going to do it. I knew I was going to cancel my wedding. I knew I wasn't going to marry him. And the reason I was crying was because I was scared of what was going to happen. And that was probably like, you know, the low point of my Saturn return, and also the snapping free of no longer living and trying to like make a life according to anybody else's recipe. I was like, for the first time in my life, probably, I was doing something that was purely what my soul was asking for. I wasn't factoring anybody else into it. Like before that, I was having thoughts like we were already engaged and I was planning the wedding, and this was mostly after the bachelorette weekend, but I was having thoughts like, hopefully we get divorced soon so that I can get on with my life. Like, you're planning for divorce and yet you're still gonna marry him? Why? I just like was asleep. I wasn't waking up until Saturn stationed direct and I heard the voice come to me and it said, you have to cancel the wedding. So like I knew on a deeper level that I don't want this. And I was basically approaching it like, I'm going to follow the rules. I gave my word. I'm going to honor my word. At the end of it, I decided I don't want this. I don't want to marry him. Like, our engagement has so many issues and is so heavy. And it's like, this is supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. And if we're not happy now, how is the marriage going to be any better? So I Googled, how do you cancel a wedding? And Google actually has some really awesome steps for that if you ever need to know. And so the first step, unsurprisingly, is to tell your partner that you do no longer want to marry them. So the next day, August 4th, was the day that I told my fiance that I was not going to marry him. And I did not break up with him on that day. We stayed together for another couple weeks until we both basically realized that, yeah, this just isn't what we want. It was like almost like musical chairs to a certain extent. Like, I think he was ready, I was ready for the on paper merging of assets, joint assets, like, let's buy a house, let's have kids, like, we're this age, this is what you do. And through musical chairs, he and I found ourselves together, and we were totally going to do it. He was totally going to do it. He was going to marry me, and I was going to marry him, until August 3rd, when the voice told me no. The voice said, you have got to cancel the wedding. I will never forget. It was maybe one of the best days of my life. Okay, so September 18th of 2015, that was when Saturn made its official ingress into Sagittarius. So it's going to be there for another 2.5 years or whatever. And my wedding was supposed to be on September 19th, so the next day. So it's like that choose your own adventure option where, like, if I had ignored the voice, or if the voice hadn't been able to break through and like tell me that, or like if I had married him, like how different my entire Saturn return would have been. Like, I just can't even imagine, because my entire Saturn return would have likely played out in a different way of gaining responsibility and having that initiation. Like, he and I were basically both ready to have kids. And at this point, I don't think I want kids. So, I mean, I'm almost 34, and that was at age 27. And like, just imagining how different, like, that one choice of canceling my wedding, like it split apart my reality. It put me on a whole different trajectory in my life. So this was the first phase. Was I was already engaged when Saturn officially made it into Sagittarius, and then figuring out, like, am I really going to marry him, or am I going to go my own way? And I chose at the end of it to go my own way. And maybe that's like Saturn in Sagittarius, like it was always going to be like a limitation of freedom or freedom. Like, what do you want? And I chose freedom, and that's very Sagittarius archetype oriented. So I don't know if that's a specific Sagittarius thing, like how that set it up for me, but choosing to go my own way was liberating in a way where I don't think I can put it into words other than to say it literally changed my life. Like, yeah, there's no other way to put it. So also around the end of 2015 was when I got into a very intense relationship where I'm a Scorpio descendant and I have my Pluto in Scorpio, and he had an entire stellium in Scorpio. So as far as, like, you know, our descendant being our shadow and our blind spot, and that's why we manifest people who are heavy in that energy so that they can help us wake up to our blind spots. It was like, again, you can't make this shit up. So I began dating him and like having that relationship, and it brought, oh my God, like it was like shadow work palooza to be with him. And because of that, we broke up a lot. It was just so emotionally intense. It was hard to take. And by the time we got to March of 2016, I was in a pretty deep depression because so much of my shadow had been brought to the surface. It, like, being with him had triggered every ounce of my jealousy issues, which, if you're familiar with jealousy issues, they really boil down to a lack of self-worth. It's like I thought this much of myself, and basically thought, like, why wouldn't he fall in love with someone else and leave me behind? Like, how is that not what's gonna happen? And yeah, it was exactly what I needed, you know? Again, it's like how you look at these consequences, like there are so many different ways to see it, because manifesting that relationship, while it did bring me a lot of pain, it also woke me up. Like, I don't know how your spiritual process has been. Chances are, if you're studying astrology, you're at least somewhat into your spiritual process, but like, my awakening, if you want to call it that, came through suffering. And so many people that I've heard talk, like Eckhart Tolle has basically the exact same story as what I'm talking about, where like the suffering got so bad where I found myself at this fork in the road of like, either I'm going to figure out how to be happy or I'm going to off myself. Like, I'm just so freaking done living like this. And it was because of the suffering that relationship brought to me. And in the symbolism of it, it was very much about taking him off, like that relationship and the ways that it had like ensnared my soul. Like it was so a process of detangling myself and finding my own power inside of myself and finding like my own resiliency inside of myself instead of being dependent on this relationship. And so that, I mean, again, it's like, how do you want to look at it? Severe depression, that sounds really awful, but it led to some awesome consequences of spiritual awakening. Saturn went retrograde March 25th of 2016, all the way through August. And while Saturn was retrograded, that was when my spiritual awakening happened. And again, it basically went like, I was so depressed, I was leaning back into deciding if I wanted to be alive or not. And I recognized that place of like, yeah, there's really nothing good that comes after this. So I'm gonna find a therapist. I'm just gonna go get myself some help. And I get online and I'm like, bada bing, bada boom. And I find myself a new therapist and I go see her like 2 days later. Less than 5 minutes into the session, if you've heard me talk on my channel before about the deservability treatment, you've probably heard this story, but less than 5 minutes into the session, she goes and gets a piece of paper. She has me read it. It's the deservability treatment by Louise Hay. And it's basically like a whole page of I am affirmations. And it is affirming your own sense of worthiness and the fact that you even deserve love in the first place. And as I read through it and I bawled my eyes out and like wanted to stop because like this hurts so bad. And she's like, yeah, I think we found the root of the issue. Like, I think some self-esteem, some self-worth, some self-valuation is what needs to be cultivated here. And the next day I found Abraham Hicks. I went looking for guided meditations and stumbled onto a Good Morning Rampage by Abraham Hicks. And I then began down this rabbit hole of my spiritual awakening and studying law of attraction and our emotional guidance system and basically figuring out that like, here's this entire language and philosophy, law of attraction, that says that like life is just a reflection of what you're putting out there. So like, if I'm so miserable, if I'm so unhappy with my job is unfulfilling, my relationship, I'm scared he's gonna find like blah, blah, like there's just all these things that are just like tormenting me. And learning law of attraction, I'm like, you're telling me like that's just a reflection of what's going on inside of me. And if something inside of me was different, that my life would be different? Really? I really hope that's not right because I really want it to be somebody else's fault. Almost 6 years later, nope, that's exactly how it works. At least that's my opinion. Because I spent the first 5 months or so of like learning Abraham of like, okay, so let's just say, like basically I was at a point where there was nowhere to go but up. So, I mean, I might as well try on this belief set and see if it works and keep what works and disregard the rest. And so I started playing with it. And one of the things that she encourages is spending as much time as possible in appreciation. And so gratitude lists. There's also a TED Talk that I really loved that I was already familiar with, where it's called the Happy Secret to Better Work, I think is what it's called, by Sean Acor. One of my favorites. And he's a positive psychologist or something like that. And he talks about how to train your brain for positivity and how it is like measurable that when you feel better, you have better outcomes. Like they were studying doctors and like if the doctor felt comfortable and calm and secure and like they had everything under control, they had a better outcome in treating patients. And when the doctor felt negative or stressed or like overwhelmed or any of that, their outcomes with patients went down. Not as good doctors when they're unhappy. So it's like provable that when we train what's inside of us to feel good and to, be what we want it to be, focusing ourselves towards appreciation, counting our blessings, like looking at where do I already have what I've wanted in the past, because it's so easy. He says like we put happiness on the cognitive horizon where like it's so easy to get what you want and then immediately you move on to like, he's like, you met your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. You got a job, now you need to get a better job. Like you got good grades, now you can get better grades. Like he just like gives you all these examples and you're like, yes, that's exactly what it is. That's been my life. But it's like, we don't have to do that. We can allow ourselves to feel good in the now. We can put, the cart before the horse, as far as like, our society is very trained of like, show me the proof and then I'll believe it. And in that same way, like, give me the good thing and then I'll feel happy. And it's like, what if you felt happy anyway? What if you felt happy proactively and let the world reflect that to you? What if that was a thing? So that first 5 months of finding Abraham was wild in terms of basically my life proved to me that it was true. Like, I started that day that I found Abraham, I started making gratitude lists. And just like Sean says, like, all you need to do is like write down 3 things. Like, we're not trying to spend 3 hours like drawing gratitude lists. Like, if you can spend 5 minutes writing 3 things, you've done good work. So that was where I started, was every day I was going to write down 3 things I was grateful for. And this overall shift, like, this is definitely where it kind of takes off, as far as like, I was building a life according to somebody else's recipe, and shifting gears into building your own life according to your own recipe. That doesn't just happen overnight. And so I feel like that first 5 months of finding Abraham was such that shift of like, okay, so if I'm not going to do it according to how everybody else does it, how do I know what to do? And then here I manifest Abraham Hicks to teach me about my emotional guidance system and how my literal emotions will point me in the right direction in real time. So yeah, that's like super valuable. And it took me a little bit of time to kind of get the hang of, oh my gosh, yes, when I feel better, my life is better and easier and happier. And when I get all tangled up inside of my own stress, life is harder. And so it's like, it becomes imperative to manage your own emotions. And so that's what I was recognizing. And it's kind of funny that like, I had to go through that part all by myself. And then almost immediately, so like a month later, I adopted my first dog, Stella. When I was with Jason, he had gotten a dog, Thor, and he only had him for a few months before we started seeing each other. So Thor grew up with me just as much with Jason, and he had kind of chosen me as his master. And so he followed me around everywhere. I'd never had that before. And so when Jason and I broke up, I gotta say, like, mostly I missed the dog. And after a year of not having a dog, and I went through all of this process with my spiritual awakening, that was like one of the first things that changed was I got a dog. I got my own dog, and like me and Stella went running, and it was just a totally different lifestyle to have her with me all the time, because obviously now I'm going outside multiple times a day. I'm getting way more exercise because I'm having to walk her because we live in the city. So there was just a huge shift at that point that like, it was only like a month of studying Abraham, and I felt like my life just kind of blossomed at that point, and then it didn't really stop until I'll let you know when it stops. Okay, so I adopted Stella. That means that now I have Lola and Stella. I got Lola back when I was in college. So I've had her a long time. And then, so this other milestone was extremely significant, and I'm not going to go into it in super great detail just because I don't want to promote doing this if this isn't something that you're already being called towards. Like, I was being called to try mushrooms. It was a soul level calling that it's like, please do this. And I would say I had that like from the time I was in college. I never had the opportunity, like I never crossed paths with it in college, but I definitely started thinking about it just because there were definitely people who told me stories, and I was like, I want that. I think I want that. And then it took me like 8 years to actually do it. And even beyond those 8 years, probably about the time I got Stella, it was like at least 3 or 4 months of very seriously considering doing it. And I found a source, and I did research, and I talked to different people who had done it several times. I got their advice. I prepared myself. I feel like I had a really healthy fear of what was possible with a bad mushroom trip. I had heard enough of those stories that like, it's not something to fool around with. It's not recreational. It's like, I felt like it was a spiritual initiation that my soul was asking for. And before I did it, I couldn't understand why. And that's why I put it off for so long. But after finding Abraham and like what she was talking about, like, you know, the things that feel good, like walk towards them. And if a good feeling thought is occurring to you over and over and over again, like you're meant to go towards that thing. And like, it felt so good and it felt so right. And like, I just couldn't not do it. So on November 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving of 2016, it's also interesting because I didn't go home for Thanksgiving that year, which is that was significant. That was the first time that I had ever like skipped being with my family on a major holiday. And that was also like kind of part of that growing up initiation, as far as like, I didn't want to. Like, that's not my idea of a good time. So I'm going to do what I think is fun, and I'm going to do what is satisfying to me. It's my holiday from work, and I'm not going to do something just because I feel obligated. I'm going to do something that feels like it's satisfying to my soul. And so I skipped going home, and I stayed, and I had a Friendsgiving, and the day before I did mushrooms. And oh my gosh, I needed it. I needed that. It was absolutely a spiritual initiation, and I had a spontaneous past life regression in the middle of it, and all sorts of different things. And I'm gonna flash my notes here on the screen. If you want to pause and read it, you're more than welcome. But I am a scientist at heart. I perform experiments, and I observe and I learn, and then I change my variables in my next experiment, and I do the experiment and I observe and I learn, and then I change my variables. And like, that's mutable energy. That's basically what we're doing. And so yeah, that was a good time doing the mushrooms. And literally 2 weeks later, I quit my software company job. I decided to take a leap of faith and step away from a six-figure salary to, I wasn't really sure. Like at that time, I had barely started a blog that I was kind of working on. I didn't really have very good rhythm with it, but I was like, if I don't have work to do, maybe I could like get some rhythm going with that. I knew I wanted to travel. I knew I wanted to have adventures. My basic plan was to do whatever came up, to say yes to life, to say yes to the path unfolding in front of me. And even the story of how I quit is very interesting, I think, in terms of, again, it's an initiation into adulthood. It's an initiation into, who are you in this world? Like, who do you want to be? And if you look at the story, like as I'm telling it, like basically that's the question that is being asked of me over and over and over again. And even making the decision to leave my software company job, it was like that thought came to me in meditation, like in my morning time. For like a month, I was having that thought. And the whole time I was talking myself out of it. I was saying like, no, I'm gonna wait until January 1st because we're already in December and 20% of my salary is my bonus. So six-figure income and 20% is the bonus. So I'm like this close to having this much more money in my savings account. No, I'm gonna stay. And that became a really interesting spiritual evolution experience because that's not who I wanted to be. At the end of all of it, I got wind that like in my department, I was one of like maybe 8 supervisors. And I heard through the grapevine that I was not the only one leaving. And basically that like half of the supervisors in this department are all planning a January 1st exit. And that like basically all of us were thinking the same thing, like get your bonus and then you're done, moving on. And as I sat with that, it's also relevant to mention that like throughout my time working there, I feel like one boss after the next just like taught me more and more and more about how not to be the boss kind of thing, until my very last boss who I worked for the last 8 months that I was there. Her name was Adrienne, and she inspired me. She was a force to be reckoned with, a force of nature just so talented, and I genuinely enjoyed working for her. And so that experience at the end was really interesting, because by that time I had lost the malice that I had like towards the company itself. Like, it's their company, they get to do whatever they want with it, and I don't agree, so I'm going to leave. That's not a mad thing. I get to go where I most align with myself. And so I'm making that choice. And so as I hear that like half of her supervisors are going to quit, I just start feeling so guilty that like I'm going to screw her over for this money. Like, that's what I'm doing, because it's going to make life that much harder on her. And like, it really got me thinking again of like, in 20 years, like, this was how I finally decided to do what I did, which was quit before I got my bonus. But I looked at it and I'm like, in 20 years, how are you going to feel about doing this to someone that you genuinely respect and admire? You're going to like, you know, pull the rug out from under her like all of these other people. Because at that point, like, the rotations and like reassignments within the company all happen on the quarter, and by January 1 those decisions are made. So you're forcing them to go back and like rewrite, otherwise you're leaving like half of the staff unsupervised. Like, she don't have time for that. So yeah, I just like felt really guilty that like we were all going to gang up on her, and I decided that like I would rather sleep well at night and like quit without that money and live with myself, as far as like, I want to feel good about how I chose to handle this. And it doesn't feel good to like wait until I get this money and then, you know, gang up on her and quit like everybody else. So I decided to go ahead on December 7th and quit when the bonuses don't come out till like right at Christmas. And as a thank you for me deciding to do that, they gave me my bonus anyway. They really appreciated the integrity that I showed, and that the respect that I gave them, and the heads up, and they said, you've more than earned this. It's yours. Of course we would give it to you. And I was like, no fucking way. That's amazing. So like, not only as a company, they don't do 2 weeks. So like, when you quit, you maybe get a day, if that, and then you're done. So like, I knew I wasn't going to have to work 2 weeks, but I essentially got an extra 2 weeks of not having to work there. And I went ahead and got my bonus. So that was like so cool. And I got to live with myself. And it was like, again, I'm reminded of consequences, you know, like I chose who I wanted to be. Like, at the end of all of it, 20 years from now, you know, $20,000-$30,000, like, it's going to feel like peanuts compared to if I have regret about screwing over someone that I genuinely respect and have like a good relationship with. I would rather honor that relationship and do what I feel is right. And then the consequence of it was that they appreciated that and chose to give me my bonus anyway. So that just, I think that's probably one of the better examples of like consequences, you know, like none of the things that happen during our Saturn return are set in stone. And if anything, they're choice points. It's just like a series of forks in the road asking you, who do you want to be in this world? How do you want to show up? How do you want to be remembered? I want to be remembered for my integrity. I want to be remembered for doing what's right, even when there's a pile of money staring me in the face. And I think the world needs that, you know? And like, I can't make anybody else do it, so I guess I'm going to show up and do that job myself. So this is the part where I just get to rattle off a ton of memories that are the best times of my life. So when I left my job, December 7th of 2016, like I said, I just wanted to say yes to life and whatever came up. And about a week after I quit, my friend Lauren calls me up and says, hey, I'm going to go to Japan and one other country. Do you want to come? And without asking a single question, I said, hell yes. When do we leave? She said 4 days. And I said, okay, cool. And so she came over the next day and we bought our tickets and we left. So that trip was December 28th of 2016 through January 14th of 2017. And we started by going to Tokyo in Japan, and then we flew to Okinawa on New Year's Eve. And so we spent New Year's Eve on a beach in Okinawa and woke up the first day of 2017 to the most beautiful sunrise I've ever seen. The place we were staying was literally on the beach. And that was how I started 2017. And so that really set the tone or how magical my life would become. So mind you, this is 6 months after finding Abraham, and I feel like this is still kind of part of that turning of like, when you choose to live life according to your own recipe, you will be amazed at how magical it can truly get. Then March 11th through the 21st, I was invited by my friend Taylor, who basically was going to Sydney for work for a week, Sydney, Australia, and asked if I wanted to come. I could stay in her hotel room, and then we could go to Auckland, New Zealand on our way back and visit our friend Suzanne. And so we did that, and that was magical. And then April 1st through the 17th, I went and stayed with my parents for an extended amount of time. It just sounded like fun. I didn't really know why I wanted to go there. That was very out of character for me at that point. But I find it extremely fascinating that while I was there, one, Saturn went retrograde, so that period started again. My Saturn in my chart is retrograde, so I want to pay attention this year for the first time and like while it's happening and see how it goes. But seems like in these timelines, like when Saturn is retrograde, having a natal Saturn retrograde, it's like so much good stuff happens. So Saturn turns retrograde, and then on April 13th of 2017, I had my first mediumship experience, meaning I had a passed over soul come to me and interact with me and want me to deliver a message on their behalf. And up until that time, I had no conscious awareness that I could do this. At this point now, looking back, like I am positive that I had these gifts as a child and that I turned them off because they frightened me and nobody around me could help me understand. So I just was like, enough of that. And basically, like during my Saturn return, it was like those gifts coming back online. So that very first experience was actually my grandpa wanting me to deliver a message to my grandma. And because this was my first experience and my family's not spiritual whatsoever, I was very, very resistant to my grandpa. I would basically said, no, I'm not going to tell her that. But what I can do is cut some bouquets for her. She basically was in the hospital having an operation, and he told me, she's scared. She's so scared, and she doesn't need to be. I'm looking out for her. She was there by my side through everything that ever happened to me, in and out of the hospital with cancer and heart things and on and on. She was always by my side, and I am by her side. She doesn't need to be scared. Please tell her I'm there. And I just like couldn't bring myself to do it. So I cut all these bouquets so that there would be all of these different life things like flowers and greenery and all of that in her house when she came home from the hospital. That was the best I could do. So just a couple weeks after that was when my cousin called me and asked if I wanted to be his 50-50 partner in opening a grocery store in our hometown. So at this point, I was still living in Dallas, and my lease was up in July. So I knew in July of 2017, I was leaving Dallas. I had known that for months, that it's way too expensive to live here if you're not going to be working here. And my plan was actually to go to Costa Rica and teach English, because if you live in Costa Rica, you can actually be profitable as an English teacher. And I had already done some volunteering also during my Saturn return. I didn't mention it, it was in 2016. The first part of 2016, I volunteered as an English as a second language teacher and really, really enjoyed it. And so I was going to go get certified in Costa Rica to be an ESL teacher, and then most likely stay in Costa Rica and teach there and just see what happened next. And before I could fully make those arrangements, my cousin called and asked if I wanted to be the partner in the grocery store, which meant in July I would be leaving and going back to my hometown in Kansas, not Costa Rica. So obviously a slight change of plans. And I knew that I wanted to open a business, but I had never actually had an idea of like what kind of business is it? I didn't have an idea. So I just was kind of waiting to see what would unfold. And he proposed grocery store, and I tell you, my soul went, yes, hell yes, do it now. Like, I'm so excited. It was such a hell yes moment that I will never in my life question whether or not I was supposed to do it or not, because there was no denying. There was no way I couldn't not do it. And so that began a whole unfolding that has basically carried through all the way into the present 5 years later. So before I moved home, I wasn't done with my travels though, because I went and spent some time in Colorado with my friend Sierra, and then I set off on an Alaskan Abraham cruise. So there were however many people on the boat overall, like a couple thousand, I think. And then there were about 800 of us that were there specifically for the Abraham seminar. So everywhere you went, there were plenty of people who like basically were living in the same way as me, where like all of us are practicing getting as happy as we can on the inside and then watching our life be magical in reflection of that. And that week on that cruise ship was absolutely the best week of my entire life. So I can't even like necessarily point to like any one thing and say this is why. I think for the most part, it was the most magical because I was the most in alignment that I've ever been. And so were so many of the cooperative components around me. And because of all of this massive alignment, it was like perfectly divine timing. Like everywhere you went, every single moment was timed to perfection to create just a literally magical experience, including on the very last day. So I actually have a whole podcast episode where I tell the story of the last day of the cruise and I'll put that here on the screen and the link in the description so you can watch it if you want, but it's where I actually came face to face with Esther Hicks. And it was as we were getting off the boat, and in the episode, I go through like the details, the levels of details that had to come together for my timing to basically like walk off the ship as the person right behind Esther Hicks, who channels Abraham. And so like that was like a magical manifestation all by itself, to like just even be a few feet away from her, like out in the world, like in real life, like she's not on stage, like I just happened to cross paths with her. Holy fucking shit. And that would have been enough. You know, I was just nothing but grateful at that moment. And she went this way and we went this way, and like, okay, that was the whole experience. And I was just like, just buzzing. I was so excited. And then we turned to leave and I passed her again. And this time she was facing me and she was just kind of standing there, just kind of looking. And I basically like get right up next to her and I say, thank you. And that's all I said, because I was about to cry, like about to burst into tears. I was so powerfully grateful to this human being for the work that she had put into the world, that I had found in a very dark time, and that I had then used her teachings, which exist on YouTube for free, mind you. So like up until going on the cruise, I hadn't spent any money on her teachings. And I just was like so overwhelmed with gratitude. And so that's all I said. I looked at her in her eyes and I said, thank you. And she looked back at me and she said, thank you. And like the way she said it, it was so genuine. It was like she was just as grateful for me as I was for her. Like, and it just was such an incredible moment. And so that was how the cruise ended. And it was like the cherry on top of like the most magical Sunday I'd ever eaten. So yeah, check out the podcast episode for more on like all of the little threads of timing. Like for days, the threads of timing were being woven together. Like it was incredible what the universe did to get me to be the one to walk off the ship behind her. Like, if you've ever had any question about how blessed we truly are in this universe, like I feel like that podcast episode just like lays all that to rest. But for me anyway, you know, that's all I can ever do. Let's see here. So that was just the beginning of the last day. At the end of the last day, like in the evening, I had a whole experience with a fellow Abraham follower that I had met on the cruise. And she had planned to stay in Seattle open-endedly. She hadn't bought her ticket home yet, so she was just kind of play it by ear or whatever. And I knew I had like 14 hours in Seattle that day. The ship docked like 6 a.m. And so I had all day in Seattle before my flight was going to go home that night. And so we ended up finding a hotel and hanging out at the hotel pool and going to lunch and dinner at the hotel restaurant and just kind of like took it easy. And she's a psychic. So like basically all day we talked about psychic abilities, and she has had so many different experiences. She's been a working psychic for such a long time, and I feel like my abilities were like just coming online, and my ability to listen to my intuition is just coming online. And so we talked about so much of that stuff for like 12 hours, like that whole entire day. And I was at dinner with her right before I was going to leave and go back to the airport, and she was telling me about this like turning point in her life where it looked like this thing was really going to happen for her and she really wanted it, and she had this dream. And then like she went home to her dad's house or something, and the neighbor at her dad's house, who had lived there the whole time she had been growing up, so like knew him really well. Anyways, like there was some kind of space thing, like a shooting star or a comet or something like that going on that night, and they both came out at the exact same time to look at it. And so they got talking, and she doesn't live there, obviously. It was her dad's house, so like she hadn't seen him in a long time. And she's telling him about this dream that she has, that she like wants to do this work or whatever. And he is just so supportive and is like overwhelmingly supportive, and has this connection to hook her up with, and has this person who might be able to provide some funding, and has this and this. And he's like, I'll email you. And he's so excited. And then he never does. And he never emails her. And she's like devastated, and she's questioning herself and like, you know, what? He was so convincing. Like, why did I fall for that? Like, blah, blah, blah. And eventually 6 months later, she had the idea to Google him and see like, you know, what the fuck? Like, what is he doing? And he died the day after they had that conversation. He passed away. So he didn't, you know, leave her high and dry. He didn't mean for that to happen. And that she suffered over that for a long time, because she thought he lied to her. And he came to me in full force in the middle of that conversation. And now I understand that like what this experience is called trans channeling, where like the energy comes in to my vessel essentially and is like using my vessel, speaking in first person, like I am animating their spirit for that moment. It's weird. But I was in this like perfect place, perfect time where like the first time it happened, I'm all by myself. I have no idea what's going on. My dead grandpa wants me to tell my alive grandma this. And I'm like, no, not going to happen. And so now that I'm with Sue, the psychic, I'm like, he's here. And I want to tell you, and like he takes off in first person to like explain to her, like he apologizes, he reaffirms everything that he had said about how much he believes in what she was going to do originally, and how, you know, this is part of it too, with like the suffering that came from wanting that dream and kind of like falling off of it for a little while because she felt like left hanging by this guy. And so that suffering, like it's actually part of the bigger picture of what you're going to create. That was a piece that is going to get integrated into this. And he gave her advice about like, and this is not stuff that like I knew how to say or what to say, like it just came out. And by the end of it, he was crying / I was crying. And she was crying, and like it was just this powerful exchange of like she needed that. She needed to hear it. She needed like that reaffirmation, and I was a willing participant in that moment. And that experience, like it left me with a completely different appreciation for the power and the value of allowing myself to share the messages that come through me. That like when I feel a loving message move through me and I deny the world of receiving that, when I like say, no, I'm not going to share it because I don't want to be seen as crazy, like, I don't think I like that. Like, I don't think that sits right with me. I think if I feel love come through me and it wants to be channeled in a particular direction, like, I think I'm done questioning that. Like, I think I want to trust that more. I want to trust this energy of like the love that I can feel. I trust that it's real. So if I feel inspired to shed some love on someone, I'm going to do it. And at that point, that was very much like a first step down this path of like, basically my purpose is unconditional love of myself and everyone else. And this was that initiation of seeing, like, when I share my spiritual gifts with people, like, it's powerful. It moves them. Like, it moves their energy into a new space where I helped them to create a new territory inside their life. And now they have that new territory to run with. And it was such another powerful step in my awakening, no doubt about it. So I get back from the Alaskan cruise, back to Dallas, and I was there for a couple days to say goodbye to my friends. I went and picked my dog up from the border, and the dog border, not the Mexico border, you know. But anyways, so I picked my dog up and we drove to Kansas, and that was me moving back to Kansas. And the whole way, it was just so exciting. Like, I was moving forward on my divine path, like who I was born to be. And I felt like, coming off that Alaskan cruise, like, I felt this massive tidal wave of alignment that it just felt like it was carrying me so effortlessly. And a couple days after we got back, or a couple days after I moved to Kansas, was when we took possession of the grocery store. So walking in there for the first time, I was like, what the fuck have I done? It stunk. It was so gross. But with, 8 months of TLC and, about $1 million, we were able to turn it around. And so the inside and the outside, I personally think, came out beautifully. And again, I had never done a construction remodel project. I had never opened a grocery store, obviously. And those 8 months of learning and building and learning and making mistakes and costing myself money because I made mistakes and got to redo it because that was wrong, and like whatever else, like, it was such a valuable education as far as seeing myself doing something that I had never done before. And walking out the other side of that experience, my confidence, I mean, again, basically now I know I can learn anything I set my mind to, and I know I can open basically any business because it's just a matter of like basic business skills, basic project management skills, and being able to learn the technical aspects of whatever industry you're in. So I can open any business. Like, I wonder what my second Saturn return will bring, but that confirmation was worth its weight in gold as far as like going back to the beginning when like I first got handed that deservability treatment and I was wrapped up in jealousy issues and so depressed with my life. And it's like the answer all along was self-esteem, self-value, self-worth. And I feel like my Saturn return, that was the consequence of doing, like showing up to the task, like showing up to the mountain that wanted to be climbed. And what I got out of it was self-worth. So, like, again, you can take that to the bank. Confidence in ourselves, oh my gosh, like it's like bubble wrap for being in this world. Like, the world is traumatizing. There's contrast everywhere you look. And the ability to be resilient in the middle of all of it is so much about knowing that you can land on your feet. And having that confidence in yourself is a matter of having seen yourself do it before. And during your Saturn return, like, either you're gonna watch yourself do some really incredible things that you had no idea you were capable of, or you're gonna walk out of it depressed. And that just sounds like obviously not nearly as much fun. So, my 2 cents. Just a couple months after I got back to Kansas, I was winding down for the night and saw out my window another really beautiful sunset. I'm drawn to sunrises and sunsets. They're just so naturally beautiful. Taurus rising. And It was a beautiful sunset. I couldn't quite see it though, and so I go outside and go around to the west side of my house and take a lawn chair, and I'm playing music and taking pictures of the sky, and it's so beautiful. And I've been out there for just a couple minutes when this little orange ball comes running through the yard up to me, and Stella and Lola were all out there, and it was a kitten. And it was so little, it looked like it hadn't eaten in days. And I took it in and it started eating Stella's dog food. And so I realized it could eat some cat food, and I gave it some cat food, and I took it back outside, and it ran back inside and was like, no, I live here now. So that was how Nugget adopted us. That was like another, at that point, like I realized, wow, like once you got a cat and a dog, having a second cat is like this much more responsibility. So in December of 2017, that was when my Saturn return exacted, which was December 14th, but 2 days before that, on December 12th, Saturn was also exactly conjunct my Uranus, and then 2 days later it was exactly conjunct my Saturn. And it was in between those 2 days that I had my third mediumship experience, where again, this one was different yet from the first two, where this one, it was a friend of mine that I had known from school, and her husband died really young, like from a heart attack at 36 kind of thing. And so she's been getting over that for years at this point. And he came and he wanted me to tell her this, and he like guided me to find this book and wanted that sent to her. Like he had this whole thing planned out, and like I was just cooperating with like what he wants. I was giving him physical hands, and then he wanted me to tell her some stuff, and he helped me to write it in a way where she could hear it, because she is extremely Christian, and I don't believe she subscribes to the idea of reincarnation and all of that. So it just got a little bit tricky to like tell her like, here's what he wants to tell you, without trying to explain like, how is it that I have this message, right? So we wrote something, he and I wrote it together to her, so that I could convey as much as I could what he wanted said, without wrapping it in a bunch of like pretext that isn't important anyway. Like he really wanted the message to get across, and he helped me write it in a way where he thought it would. And it did, and she really enjoyed the message, and we ended up having a really good conversation as a result of that. And so that one was really interesting. Yet as far as like the one with Sue was so direct, of like, I just let him in and he talked. And I realized like that was because I knew that she was open. She was up to speed. She could hear it this way. And when that wasn't the case, like in that third experience, it was just another layer of like, really grateful to see that I can channel this in a way where the message is going to be received. I don't want to just like speak the truth and spout it all out if it's not going to be heard. I want the message to land and make an impact. And so that third experience was such like a harmonious approach of like really having to put it into language where the message could be received. And then just a few days later, on December 20th, was when Saturn moves into Capricorn. And from there, it's like, okay, so we leave it at December 20th of 2017. And at that point, we were about 3 months from opening the grocery store. And at that point, it's like a whole nother beast to run a grocery store than it is to open one. So I wanted to provide like just since the end of my Saturn return. So like I said, I'm almost 34. So in the 4.5 years since December of 2017, what's unfolded? So it starts with February 28th of 2018 was when the grocery store opened. And that first year I took up cake decorating. That was like kind of my outlet as far as like how I kept my creative juices flowing. I started decorating cakes. I had never done that before, but I always liked to draw and paint, and turns out those skills basically translate onto cake decorating, like painting with frosting. So I did like, 200 cakes or something like that year. So that's, that was fun. And because I opened Cecil K's, it was in June of 2019 when I got invited to the state FFA convention to give one of their keynote speeches. And that is relevant because at that speech, when I was backstage before it was my turn to go out, One, I always say yes to giving speeches because I love to give speeches. But while I was backstage, I was visiting with an old mentor of mine, and we were catching up, and it just felt really good and fun. She was who had invited me there to do the speech. And she was like, hey, do you know Jody so-and-so? She's a past state officer from Nebraska. And I was like, no, I've never heard of her. She's like, look her up on Facebook. You two you feel the same to me. I don't know what that means, but that's what I want to say. You feel the same to me. I think you would really like her. And so I looked her up on Facebook, and she did Facebook Lives at that time. So I watched like 5 minutes of one of her lives, and I was like, holy crap, I love this girl. I have to meet her. And she lives in Nebraska. So I recorded a video of myself like saying, hi, I'm Carly. You don't know me, but so-and-so told me that I should reach out to you and that I would really like you. I looked at your page. You seem really cool. If you want to be my friend, I'm on Marco Polo. You can reach out to me here. And she reached out to me, and we became such good friends. And that's super relevant because the next year, fast forward into 2020, obviously that's when the pandemic happened, and that prolonged me managing the store by a little bit, but it was also wildly informative because, again, I feel like running the grocery store in the middle of the pandemic was me getting to see my superpowers in action like never before. Like, I recognized that while the pandemic was starting, it was like basically everyone around me was caught under the wave of change and uncertainty, and I was riding on top of it. I was like thriving. I was like going crazy in this sea of change. I love it. Finally, this is what I was born for. Like, it was the best. And obviously not great, a pandemic. Like, there are plenty of things that happen that aren't cool and all of that, but at the same time, like, it was hugely informative for me to get to see, like, in terms of establishing myself in my adulthood phase of existence, it was just another layer of getting to see what I was capable of, doing things that I had never done before because I was rising up to meet life where it was, rather than being like, well, this is what I know how to do, so this is who I'm going to be in the world. I stepped forward and was like, I don't know the answer, but we're going to have to figure it out as we go. We're going to have to build the plane while we fly it because, like, we need to keep up with the rapid changes that happened at the beginning of the pandemic. In May of 2020 is when I got my first puppy. So that was like a whole nother step up in responsibility that I feel like Stella definitely helped prepare me for, but I had never had a puppy before because Stella was like 2 when I adopted her. And so having a puppy is like a whole nother level of responsibility and effort and all of that. And then in July of 2020, which is super fascinating because this is also when the North Node entered Gemini and the South Node entered Sagittarius. It was like within just a little while of the North Node getting into Gemini was when I basically had this like realization that I'm ready for my life coach. I'm ready. Whoever that is, like, I feel like they're ready for me. I'm ready for them. At that point, I had the idea to ask Jody, because Jody is a working life coach along with a massage therapist. So she came through like a whole training program. So she knows lots of life coaches. And I asked her, like, hey, do you have a recommendation of somebody that you think I might work really well with? And she's like, oh, I know you would love my life coach, Melissa. You've got to meet her. So I emailed her. And just a few weeks later, I'm meeting with Melissa in August of 2020. And that was the first time I'd ever seen or heard of a natal chart, was in August of 2020, because I decided to work with this life coach. And all I knew is that I wanted a life coach. I didn't have any kinds of like wanting an astrology life coach or even knowing that there was such a thing as a natal chart. So that was like another little way that like you really don't have to have the destination in mind to be able to get where you're going. And again, I think I wanted to share all of this extra unfolding because look at that. Like, as far as now where I'm at 4.5 years later, almost 34, astrology and me coaching people, me making content and putting it out in the world, like this is where I'm going. Like this is who I want to be in the world. And it wasn't like that astrology came to me during my Saturn return, but I think if I hadn't like done the things that I did during my Saturn return, one, I never would have given that speech where she told me to like look up Jody, and I wouldn't have become friends with her, and heard all about her life coaching experiences, which I think was definitely part of me getting ready for my own experience. Like that kind of stoked my fires of that desire. And so, yeah, it's like the seeds were planted back when I was opening a grocery store. The seeds of me being a spiritual practitioner and finding astrology and teaching astrology online, like those seeds were planted way back when I was like just opening a grocery store. So all of it gets woven together in ways where we just can't even anticipate how perfect it can possibly be. It was just a couple months after I very first saw my own natal chart that I gave my first paid reading in October of 2020. In December of 2020, I filed my LLC. So this is my natal chart for the inception of my business, which has many interesting synastry aspects with my own. I think most notable that my business midheaven is 0 degrees Taurus and my personal ascendant is 0 degrees Taurus. So that seems to be a pretty intentional degree point for me and like what I came to do here. And the way I understand Taurus is that like it's energy where you're here to find peace. You're here to get your peace foot forward. You're here to get a big dose of that for your own soul and perpetuate it out into the world for others. And so especially like that's my personal rising sign. That's how I approach the world. And now my business has a 0 degrees Taurus midheaven. And that's the point of my business, is to incite greater levels of peace on this planet. In February of 2021 was when I started my first podcast. It was a few months after that I started my second podcast. Also in April of 2021 was my first grocery consulting contract. So I haven't really ever like made a specific video saying like, here's how I make my money, but essentially how I make my money is from grocery consulting projects. And that's what gives me the flexibility to be able to do my YouTube channel kind of in between all of that. And again, it's like, you know, if I didn't have grocery consulting, it would be nearly impossible to have all of this free time to make my astrology content. And it's not that I learned how to be a grocery consultant during my Saturn return, but if I hadn't opened and operated and optimized my own grocery store during my Saturn return, I would have no expertise to be like being a consultant. So it's like all of the different pieces, like they just continue to unfold. Like it's not over once your Saturn return is over necessarily. Like it's like groundwork gets laid. It's an initiation. It's the beginning, the setting of the stage for what is ultimately going to unfold for the next 29 and a half years. So in July of 2021 was when I got what I would consider to be more of a full-time grocery consulting contract. So it allowed me to officially take a full step away from the store and its operations, and somebody else was managing it now 7 days a week, so that 7 days a week I am free to do my grocery consulting and whatever else I feel like doing. At that time, I only had a podcast, and it was only like a month later that I got really serious about posting on YouTube and started my YouTube journey because I had no video editing skills to speak of at all. I knew how to like record a Zoom and then upload it. So that's pretty limited. So I started off my YouTube journey by doing a daily content challenge where I wasn't trying to record every day, but I was trying to release every day. So I would sit down and record like for a few hours and get 5 or 6 videos. And now I have stuff to record every day for the next week. I just got to chop it down and package it and upload it. So I did like 85 days of a daily posting challenge. And then it was to the point where I was like, I don't need to do this. I'm just going to post when it's fun because I feel like I've developed the skills that I wanted to get out of that daily posting challenge. And that basically brings us to where I am today. I am finishing up that grocery contract that I got last July. And I don't really know what's going to happen after that. I'm going to go back to being a consultant who is now looking for her next project. And in the meantime, while that unfolds, I'm just really excited to rededicate myself to owning authenticity, my spiritual practice in general, and see what unfolds, right? Like the divine timing of the way the pieces come together is so much easier to see when we look back at it like this. Like, you know, while we're in the middle of it, it can feel random, it can feel chaotic, it can feel like, why on earth am I opening a grocery store of all things? And it's like path of least resistance. Path of least resistance and the path of greatest allowing. And, you know, I think there was part of my higher self that had it in the plan all along that grocery is a perfect amalgamation of all the skills you've learned so far, and that it's going to lead to this consulting work, which gives you the exact flexibility you've always wanted. So I think it was like even before I opened my grocery store that I knew I want to work online, I want to be able to travel, I want to be like a nomad and go wherever I feel like going. If I want to spend 2 months in Costa Rica, I want to go do that. So this felt really counterintuitive when it's like, hey, move back to your hometown and open a brick and mortar grocery store. It's like, wait, that's not what I wanted. And yet, when you let it play out a few years, it is exactly what I got. I got a grocery consulting package now that allows me to have the flexibility that I want, and it allows me to make money in a way where I love the quote that says, like, let 20% of your time make 80% of your money. And for me, it's like, let 20% of your time make 100% of your money. And then everything I do on YouTube is like a cherry on top. It's like any other income that my spiritual business is able to generate is extra because my grocery consulting is able to support me. And so, yeah, it's like all of the different ways that what happens during the Saturn return is only a preview for the next 3 decades. And I'm only 4.5 years in. So I don't know how it's going to keep going, but I would love to come back and like update this video here in like another 5 years and see what else unfolded from those seeds that got planted, you know, right around my 29th birthday. Thank you for listening. I hope you found value here. I hope it's hopefully helped to open up the perception of Saturn and how consequences is really a neutral word. It's not a bad word. It's neutral, and it can be whatever we make of it, and how every single decision point that comes up in your Saturn return is ultimately asking you, who do you want to be in the world? You're moving into adulthood with every single one of those choice points, and you get to write the script. It gets to be exactly what you want it to be. And the universe finds a way to reward you, even if you think that you're like my bonus story, like even where I felt I was foregoing that money, I was like, you know, the universe can bring me way more than that money. Like, I'm not going to hang myself up here. I'm going to go ahead and be true to myself, be authentic to what feels right to me, and let the universe figure out the rest. And the universe always figures out the rest. When we are true to ourselves, that's us walking on the path that our soul originally intended. And it's like every single cooperative component that's going to help us with our soul's mission already perfectly and naturally exists on your soul's path. So like the only thing that's ever like out of whack is either you're on the path or you're not. And I know when I got engaged, I was very much playing a game of musical chairs, like I said, and that like walking away from that like script or that like normal recipe of like, okay, well, I'm this old, so it's time to get married and have kids. Like walking away from that was literally the best thing I've ever done for myself. And what has unfolded since then is, in my mind, nothing short of magical in terms of like all that was ever missing was me choosing me. And as soon as I did that, everything else fell into place. So thank you again for listening. I would love to hear your Saturn return stories down below. And yeah, if you have any questions or anything else that you would like me to talk about related to Saturn returns, I would be more than happy to answer those questions if you leave them below. And until next time, dear friends, you take such good care of yourselves, and so will I.